My name is Andrew Carter. I'm 44 years old, and I served 20 years in the United States Marine Corps. But before I ever wore a uniform, I was the son of Dennis Carter, CEO of Carter Industrial Systems, and heir to a legacy I never asked for. Growing up, I didn't understand how much weight my last name carried. My father was the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone sit straighter. He built the company from a two-man operation in a rusted garage to a national supplier of precision tools for aerospace and defense contractors. People didn't just respect him, they feared him. At home, everything was measured in results. Grades, trophies, performance reviews from summer internships. There was no such thing as good enough. If I brought home a 95, he wanted to know why it wasn't 100. If I made varsity, he asked why I wasn't captain. I grew up believing that love had to be earned and that failure was unforgivable. From the time I was 10, it was understood that I would take over the company. I shadowed board meetings before I was tall enough to reach the table. By 17, I could recite financial reports better than the CFO. Business school at Wharton was a given. Everything was laid out like a straight highway with no exits, no choices, no detours. But here's the thing, I never wanted that life. I never wanted mahogany desks and stockholder calls. I didn't want to be a man who barked orders from behind glass. I wanted to be on the ground, where real things happened, where I could make a difference. I still remember the exact moment I broke the news to him. We were having dinner at some private club he belonged to, one of those places where the wine lists are heavier than the menus. He was sipping his scotch when I said it. I didn't ease into it. I didn't soften the blow. I just said, "Dad, I've decided to enlist." He didn't blink, didn't speak, just stared at me for a long 10 seconds. Then he put his glass down and said, "That would be the biggest mistake of your life." I told him I'd already made my decision. I wanted to serve. I wanted something real, something that mattered. His hands tightened around his napkin. He said he didn't raise me to dig trenches. That Carter men don't follow orders, they give them. Then he told me that if I walked out that door, I shouldn't expect to come back. I walked anyway. At boot camp, they shaved my head and stripped me of everything I knew. But for the first time, I felt free. Nobody cared who my father was. Nobody expected me to be anything other than what I was willing to fight for. I was Andrew Carter, Marine recruit, not Dennis Carter's son. And that felt like the first honest breath I'd ever taken. Still, no matter how far I ran, his voice followed me. In the back of my mind during night drills, during deployment flights, during those quiet hours before dawn when the world goes still. He wasn't there, but he was always present, not with love, with judgment, with silence. I wrote to him once after my first deployment. Nothing long, just a card. Said I was safe. Said I hoped he was well. He never replied. That silence stretched for years, becoming thicker, colder, until it was no longer just distance. It was exile. You'd think after all that time I'd stop caring, that I'd bury that part of me and move on. And maybe I thought I had. Until that day at my sister's wedding, when he stood in front of everyone and said the words that broke something in me I didn't know was still intact. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all you need to know is this. My name is Andrew Carter. I served my country with pride, and the man who raised me could never forgive me for that. My sister's wedding was everything my father ever wanted. A 5-star venue on the coast, gold-trimmed invitations, floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. Every detail was meticulously perfect, designed to reflect the Carter name: elegant, powerful, impossible to ignore. I flew in the night before, alone, dressed in my dress blues because I knew it was the only version of me that might still earn a sliver of his respect. From the moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt like a ghost. Guests nodded politely, some whispered, others looked unsure whether they should thank me for my service or avoid me altogether. My mother gave me a tight smile, then moved on. And my father, he looked straight through me like I wasn't there. No hello, no handshake. Just a glance that lasted half a second too long, cold enough to burn. They sat me at a table near the back. It was close enough to see the stage, but far enough that it was clear I wasn't part of the show. My name wasn't listed in the program. No mention of the older brother who'd flown halfway across the country to be there. When the slideshow played, every childhood photo had been carefully cropped. I was the invisible sibling, airbrushed out of our family's story. Still, I held on to this thin hope. Maybe he'd come around. Maybe a drink would soften him. Maybe he'd pull me aside for a quiet word. Some gesture to say we were still blood. That I mattered, even just a little. I kept watching him through the evening, searching his face for something: anger, regret, anything. But there was only stone. During the speeches, I clapped like everyone else. I raised my glass when asked. I even laughed, though it never reached my chest. And as the lights dimmed and the music swelled, I thought maybe this would be enough. Maybe showing up was the olive branch he needed to reach for. But even then, something felt wrong. There was a stillness in the air, like the quiet before a storm. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just crack the surface. It would shatter whatever illusion of family I had left. It happened during the father of the bride speech. My sister was glowing, smiling through tears as the applause faded and all eyes turned to the man at the microphone. My father adjusted his cufflinks, tapped the mic, and cleared his throat. I expected the usual, a toast, some charming anecdote about her childhood, a few rehearsed lines that made him look warm and paternal. Instead, he turned toward me. There was no build-up, no hesitation. Just a cold, measured voice that echoed through the room. He said, "I want to make something clear tonight. Andrew Carter is no longer part of this family. He is not welcome in my home, my business, or my life." The silence that followed was crushing. I didn't hear gasps. I didn't hear whispers. I just heard the roaring in my own ears. I didn't move at first. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was a joke, a twisted attempt at dry humor. But when I looked around, I saw faces frozen in shock. Some guests stared at their plates. Others looked at me with wide, blinking eyes. My sister stood still, her mouth slightly open, bouquet trembling in her hands. My mother was already crying. I stood up slowly. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. If I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure I could keep my voice steady. My dress blues felt suddenly too tight. The medals on my chest felt heavy, not like honor, but like shame. I could feel every stare clinging to me as I walked out of the room. The air outside was sharp and clean, like it had been waiting for me. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just walked to my rental car and sat there for a long time, hands clenched around the wheel, heart pounding in my throat. That was the moment it became final. Not just the rejection, the severing. The public execution of whatever fragile thread still connected me to the name Carter. He didn't just cut me off. He erased me. And he did it with applause still ringing in the background, under the golden lights of a wedding meant to celebrate love. All I had left was silence, and the sound of my own footsteps walking away from a life I'd never truly belonged to. The 20 years that followed weren't quiet, not in the sense of peace, or rest, or healing. They were loud with gunfire, sandstorms, helicopter rotors, and the kind of silence that hums inside your skull after a blast. But emotionally, they were dead silent. No birthday cards, no letters, no surprise visits. My family had buried me without a funeral, and I let them. I deployed 7 times. Iraq, Afghanistan, back again, then a brief break, and back once more. I served with good men and watched some of them die. I earned medals I never wore outside the field. I led younger soldiers who didn't ask about my past. In the military, you don't need a last name. You just need to show up, follow through, and not flinch when it counts. That part came easy to me. I didn't think about my father much, at least not on the surface. But his voice was always tucked somewhere in the back of my head. Every time I made a decision, I could hear the ghost of his disappointment. That cold stare across the wedding ballroom lived in me longer than I wanted to admit. I carried it through every checkpoint, every night patrol, every mail call where my name never came up. When I finally retired, I didn't move back home. I bought a plot of land in Colorado and built something from the ground up, a sanctuary for veterans and rescue dogs. It started small, just a few kennels, a borrowed trailer, some donated supplies, but word got around. The place became a kind of refuge for the forgotten, the worn out, the ones who survived but didn't know what to do next. I understood that feeling too well. The dogs came broken, just like us. Skittish, scarred, mistrusting. But with time and care, most of them came back to life. So did the men. And maybe, in a way, so did I. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't even want it. I just wanted peace. Real peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. There were moments, though, when the past tapped on my shoulder. I'd be locking up the kennels at dusk and catch a glimpse of a car I didn't recognize, parked just beyond the tree line. Once, I saw someone through the window of a diner across the street, watching me a little too long. A tall man in a coat, never approaching, just observing. It happened enough times that I started noticing patterns, but not enough to confront it. I asked one of the guys who helped at the shelter if he ever noticed anyone hanging around. He said no, maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wanted it to be him. As crazy as that sounds, a part of me wondered if my father ever regretted it. Not enough to apologize, just enough to keep tabs. Enough to wonder what happened to the son he threw out of his house. Still, I never reached out. Pride is a stubborn thing. It keeps you warm at night, but it also keeps you alone. I told myself I didn't care, that the life I built was better than the one he offered, and in many ways it was. I got to help people. I got to save lives. I got to wake up every morning knowing I made the right choice, even if it cost me everything else. I kept a drawer in my cabin with a few photos. My squad, some dogs, a younger version of me in uniform, and one photo from my childhood, back when I still looked up to him. We were at a company picnic. He had his arm around my shoulder, tight and proud. I couldn't throw it away, not because I wanted to remember him, but because I needed to remember who I used to be before everything broke. That photo stayed in the drawer, along with the questions I never asked and the answers I was too tired to chase, until one day, the call came. And everything I thought was buried came rushing back, louder than war. The call came just after 6 a.m. I was out back feeding the dogs, still half asleep and covered in hay dust. I let it ring twice before answering, figuring it was another early vet check or delivery. But the voice on the other end was clipped, formal. A man introducing himself as my father's attorney. He said my father had passed away 2 days earlier. No details, just the fact. I didn't say anything at first. Not because I didn't care, but because I honestly didn't know how to feel. It had been 2 decades since we'd spoken. 2 decades since he'd looked me in the eye and stripped me of my name. The man who disowned me was dead, and the only thing I felt in that moment was a kind of emptiness I couldn't place. Not relief, not grief. Just a blank space where something used to be. I told the attorney I wouldn't be attending any services. He hesitated, then said there were things I needed to review, that a courier would deliver some documents to the address on file. I hung up without asking questions. I didn't want to be pulled into anything. I figured it was some legal formality. Maybe a release, maybe a final jab from the grave. I didn't expect what came next. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was the official last will and testament of Dennis Carter. Along with it was a handwritten letter, blue ink on stiff white paper, folded clean and deliberate. The kind of letter that doesn't travel well unless someone wants it to last. My name was written across the front in tight, precise strokes. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. But first, the will. It was complex. To my sister, he left a controlling interest in the real estate holdings and a trust fund so large she would never have to work again. He had secured her future. But the company Carter Industrial Systems, his life's work, his legacy he left entirely to me. The controlling shares, the patents, the voting rights, just my name, over and over, in black legal type. I read it twice, then again, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. But it was clear. In the final act of his life, he handed me the legacy he once swore I was never worthy of. That's when I opened the letter, and suddenly, the weight of everything I'd buried came crashing to the surface. I could hear his voice in the way he formed his words. I could see the rhythm of his thoughts in the spacing, the pauses, the deliberate underline of my name. He had written me something I never thought possible, something close to a confession, something close to love. My hands were shaking, my chest tight. I didn't cry, but I felt something crack. Not rage, not forgiveness, just a quiet unraveling. The years he lost, the years I gave away. All of it folded into that single sheet of paper. I wasn't ready to read it all, not yet, but I knew what it meant. He'd been watching, all along. And whether it was guilt, regret, or something more complex, he had chosen to end the silence in the only way he knew how, by giving everything back. But at that moment, I didn't care about the money, I didn't care about the company, I only cared about the letter. Because buried inside it was a man I thought no longer existed. And maybe, just maybe, a version of me I hadn't met yet. If you're reading this, it means I've run out of time to say what I should have said long ago. There's no excuse for my silence. I won't pretend there is. But I need you to know, I never stopped watching. Not out of pride at first, but out of stubbornness. Then it became something else. After you left, I hired someone to keep tabs on you. I told myself it was just for security. But the truth is, I needed to know what kind of man you were becoming. I read your name in articles I never admitted to seeing. I watched grainy videos from news reports in places I'd never have the courage to visit. I saw the medals you earned, the scars you tried to hide. I tracked your deployments like a father should have, quietly, from the shadows. When you came home and opened that dog rescue, I followed every step of it. I watched you speak at fundraisers. I read the testimonials. I even saw a photo of you kneeling next to a dog with one missing leg, hand resting gently on its head like it was the most precious thing in the world. That photo broke me, because you became the kind of man I never had the guts to be. I lived behind glass walls. I measured success in numbers, in power, in fear. I demanded things from people I never gave them myself. I chose control over connection, and when you chose to walk a different path, I punished you for making the choice I was too weak to make. I told myself you betrayed the family, but the truth is, you revealed my cowardice. You wore your convictions like armor. You didn't hide from the fight. You didn't flinch in the face of loss, or pain, or loneliness. I watched from my cornered life while you built something brave and real. You led men. You saved lives. You found purpose. And you did it without me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to be remembered. But I wanted you to know this. You didn't fail me. I failed you. And somehow, despite it all, you became the man I always hoped I could be. When I finished reading the letter, I didn't move for a long time. My hands were still clenched around the paper, but my body felt like it wasn't mine. Anger rose first, sharp and sudden, not just at him, but at myself. For needing that letter more than I wanted to admit, for still aching after all these years. I wanted to tear it up, crumple it into nothing, pretend it hadn't shaken something loose inside me, but I couldn't. I sat there, staring at the words, letting the silence wrap around me like an old wound opening. Grief didn't come with tears, it came with stillness. With a strange, aching understanding that this too late letter was the only apology I was ever going to get. A week later, I stood alone at his grave. No family, no priest. Just me, the breeze, and a name carved in stone that had once made me feel small. I didn't say anything. There wasn't much left to say. Words had failed us while he was alive. I didn't see the point in offering them now. In my hand, I held the medal I'd earned during my third tour, the one I never displayed, the one I never thought he'd see. I crouched down, placed it gently on the grass beside the headstone. No note, no explanation. Just a symbol, simple and silent. That was my answer. Not vengeance, not fury. Just this act, quiet, final, and strangely freeing. I wasn't giving it to him. I was releasing it from myself, letting go of everything he didn't say. Everything I didn't say, letting it rest where it belonged. As I stood and turned to leave, the weight I'd carried for 20 years didn't vanish, but it shifted, it softened. I didn't know if that meant forgiveness. Maybe not yet, maybe never fully. But I knew I wasn't walking away with the same pain I brought in. Some ghosts don't need to be exorcised, just acknowledged, just named. And sometimes, that's enough. I didn't keep the company. I didn't sell it either. For a while, I just let it sit there, like a ghost ship full of old papers and boardrooms too big for one man. I walked the halls once, touched the desk he used to command from, sat in the chair he once ruled from. It felt cold, silent, like something that had lost its reason for existing. And then, one morning, I knew what I needed to do. I called in a team of veterans, not lawyers or bankers, but men and women who'd served and struggled, just like me. We sat around that old conference table, and I told them what I wanted. I wasn't going to turn the business into another nonprofit that printed slogans and padded resumes. I wanted to build something real, something lasting, something that turned regret into action. So we did. We converted the Carter business into a foundation. We sold off the commercial branches, kept the facilities, and turned them into training centers for veterans looking for a second chance. Welding, mechanics, animal therapy, business coaching. No suits, no ties, just tools, dirt, and purpose. The profits didn't go to me. They went into building shelters, into supplying rescue programs, into offering job placement for those who came home broken and tired. We partnered with rescue dog programs and trauma therapy teams. We gave people a space to work, to heal, to believe in something again. I named it the Carter and Son Redemption Fund, not to honor him as a businessman, but to honor the small, silent man I saw in that letter. The father I never got while he was alive. The man who watched from the shadows and, in his final breath, tried to do the right thing. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a statement. It was closure. A bridge built with everything we never said. A way to turn pain into something better. Not perfect, but better. People ask why I kept his name on it. I tell them it's because redemption shouldn't hide in shame. It should be seen, remembered. Not just for what was lost, but for what can still be found. Maybe he wasn't the father I needed when I was young, but he gave me the tools to become the man I needed to be. And now, every life we help, every dog we save, every soldier we bring back from the edge, he's part of that too. Not because he earned it, but because we all deserve the chance to be more than our worst moments. And sometimes, healing starts with the simple decision to keep going, to build something new, to let the past rest, and to finally, fully, step into your own name.